Funnily enough, the word paradigm is an interesting word to dissect, psychologically and etymologically. The Greek roots of the word paradigm literally translate to show side by side, or in other words, to compare apples to apples. That is really rather ironic, a literal root of the word paradigm, as the 21st century paradigm is essentially a prison for the mind, carved in proverbial stone, which automatically and instantly disallows us from exploring certain lines of thought or comparing the conventional accepted theorem of our world with some other alternative line of thought, even with veritable mountains of verifiable evidence contrary to the conventional theory abound. Ironic indeed when you consider the same mountains of evidence also happen to support the alternate unconventional theory, which must not be considered lest we be ridiculed and laughed off the stage, so to speak. The very word paradigm, or to compare side by side, has been twisted into the very opposite of its true meaning, a virtual prison for the mind, inhibiting what we understand to be true and correct, inhibiting what we understand to be possible or impossible, due to our inability to fit the truth into our particular paradigm, or scope of what is physically possible, or alternately what is impossible, based on our understanding of exactly what is possible or not. Just as an etymological side note, the word planet is derived from the Greek word meaning plane, or flat surface. Isn't that odd that the very word for where we live, planet, can be interpreted as a globe or a flat surface, at its very basic translation? It's been argued that the term planet was first applied to our world, since it is indeed a plane, and was applied to the wandering stars at a later time, making the entire base of the word planet as describing a sphere extremely questionable, if not totally erroneous. In other words, if our world was named a planet, meaning a plane, and then the word was later applied to the wandering stars, what a glorious misunderstanding this part of the deception is once you realize the intricate details of how this fantastical lie, or long series of misunderstandings, has manifested itself in our modern world as a religion full of overzealous pontificates of science who will tell you what is possible and what is impossible, forming your paradigm well before you have a chance to scrutinize the basic pillars of the evidence with an open mind. For people to ridicule or mock those of us who are intelligent and skeptical enough to question the conventional paradigm, which has been engraved or etched into the minds of each individual person in the world, including and especially all the scientists, and also the theoretical physicists, who are technically the opposite of scientific, since they base their entire system of sleuthing on assumptions, never bothering to confirm whether the preposterous lies they were forced into believing as a child are true or correct. Yes, even them, the theoretical physicists of the world, who are typically very intelligent people, have certainly delved far deeper into the nonsensical assumptions of their predecessors, such as Newton or Einstein, without the slightest understanding of how our world, and by extension the universe, actually work, thanks to their inherent inability to compare alternate theories, apples to apples, with their paradigm handed to them on a silver platter, which appears to be all-inclusive, aesthetically pleasing, and removes our responsibility as heralds of the earth and protectors of our neighbors to do any sort of diligence. As a related side note, the etymology of the word universe, this means essentially combined into one, or many pieces made to become a single whole, or from many come one, or e pluribus unum found on the money supply of the U.S. E pluribus unum would be a Latin summary translation of the literal English word universe, which is an interesting side note since the Freemasonic Luciferians who designed and print our money have put all sorts of mysterious statements and ultimately spells on the money. Again, e pluribus unum could literally be stated as simply universe in its raw etymological form, and on the same money supply they permanently etch phrases into our subconscious such as annuit septis or Novus Ordo Seclorum or the crown of our achievement and a new world order. Now, you couple that with e pluribus unum, or the universe. Could this be translated to mean that their crowning achievement is building a new world order with a fundamental misunderstanding built into the general population's view of the universe? I've seen compelling evidence that part of the deception involved with Blue Lodge Freemasonry includes hiding in plain sight that the world is a plane, not a sphere, and leaving it to the neophyte or initiate to figure out, which rarely happens, since most people are indeed totally incapable of considering our world as a stationary plane, which it obviously is. I wonder if their New World Order has anything to do with misguiding the masses into firmly believing in a false picture of reality or a false paradigm, a paradigm which relieves us as a species of our duty as intelligent scientific group of sovereign beings from comparing side by side or apples to apples different theories of how our world might work. To me, it's rather amusing that the very word paradigm, or to compare side by side, has been twisted into meaning an ironclad false worldview which must never dare be questioned or compared to contrary theorem, and the evidence supporting contrary worldviews must be ridiculed and mocked, but certainly never debunked or even adequately addressed by those claiming to know the world to be a spinning sphere flying around in space, contrary to all physical laws and scientific observations. You can never debunk the truth, just as you can never prove a lie to be irrefutably true. I've sort of been keeping a tally over the last few months, and about 10% of the people who stumble across my videos are able to understand the truth on their own with just a bit of preliminary information to nudge them in the right direction, which compels them to research the topic further on their own volition, and ultimately they conclude that the world couldn't possibly be a spinning sphere. That's about 10%. Now, about 50% of the people will simply never get it, although many of these people are duplicate shills, so the numbers may be a little bit skewed. But we'll say 50% who will simply never, ever, ever get it, as many of them are paid disinformation agents who will always disagree with the truth in spite of all the evidence, which they never address or even attempt to debunk, yet they claim to have debunked, which is obvious nonsense, since you inherently cannot debunk the truth. Now, the remaining 40% is sort of a coin toss, and it's totally relative to how much time or effort one can spend explaining every minute detail of this thing to them. That issue should be applauded towards the federal schooling system, which has apparently turned anywhere from 50 to 90%, somewhere in between there, of our population into mindless zombies, incapable of thinking for themselves or even seeing the truth when it's planted directly in front of their face, with a detailed explanation of what they're looking at and how it totally disproves the conventional globe Earth heliocentric model. Obviously, the conventionally accepted paradigm is contrary to the notion of the essence of a paradigm at its very root. But I digress. A couple of quick factoids you might find interesting involve the regulatory language for engineers or architects, the most practical scientific minds of any culture, whose calculations must agree with nature to avoid disastrous consequences, such as were the results of engineers who insisted upon including the curvature of the Earth into their calculations, apparently leading up into the 1800s, who ultimately forced the hand of the government regulatory bodies on buildings, tunnels, bridges, etc., to completely eliminate any notion of curvature from all architectural projects or civil engineering planning efforts, so as to avoid the loss of much life and property. In other words, if an architect or engineer tries to use spherical geometry or the non-existing curve found on the face of the earth, which does not exist, if they try to incorporate that into their plans, they will be in direct contradiction to the fundamental premises of architectural design or civil engineering projects in the first place, as the earth is not a sphere and therefore possesses zero curvature. Assuming the face of the earth to be more or less a curve is an absurdity to any architect or engineer, yet even they fail to see the implications of such fundamental standards and how such standards equate to undeniable proof of a non-spherical earth. This is evident across all aspects of engineering and architecture, especially with the consideration of bridges and long tunnels or stretches of railway, none of which include the so-called curve of the earth into their design. It's a known fact that all architects and engineers must absolutely consider the ground level as a true level and not a curve, regardless of the distance involved or the footprint of the project. Many tall buildings will use a plumb bob, which is essentially just simply a weight hanging from a string, to ensure that any vertical line is perfectly vertical, according to the ground level beneath, and, quote, gravity causing the plumb bob to create a perfectly straight line from the top of any height building directly towards the ground. If you consider this logically, if the ground was indeed a curve, then a very tall, very wide building would be wider at the top if they used the plumb bob on all four corners to ensure the perfectly vertical lines were kept straight to the top. The wider the base and the taller the building, the problem would become more and more pronounced as each of these two factors increase, that is, width and height of the building, then the problem would increase. So seeing how tall buildings are indeed built with plumb lines to ensure all sides are perfectly vertical, and the designers of the building must assume the ground to be perfectly level and not a curve, we can safely assume that the face of the earth is not a curve, and this doesn't even get into the oceans possessing exactly zero curvature, and the oceans do not have mountains and valleys. Another interesting point to make has to do with a little place called Death Valley. Death Valley is the lowest point in North America, 282 feet below sea level. Now, if you consider the fact that Death Valley is about 260 miles due east of the Pacific Ocean, I find it very hard to understand how that area could be below sea level at all. If the Earth is indeed a sphere, then the further away you get from the sea, the higher and higher you should be getting above sea level. We do all understand what a sphere is, right? And so 260 miles inland from the coast of California should put this quote-unquote lowest point in America many miles above sea level, leaving me to believe that sea level is a constant thing across a flat plane and is certainly not an apparent level and just simply an arbitrary level depending on where you are in the curve. And the sea being wrapped around a sphere is a demonstrably proven false absurdity. If you don't understand what I'm saying, take a look at a globe. The amount of curvature up and away from the sea when you're talking about 260 miles inland would be a great amount of curvature, over 8 miles above the sea level, just due to the natural curve of the earth and not even figuring in, maybe a mountain or some other type of elevation of the ground. Now, sure, the earth has mountains. However, since it's supposedly a nearly perfect sphere, according to the Apollo astronauts, then how is it possible that an area of Eastern California, which should be at least 8 miles above sea level by default curvature calculations, how is it possible that this specific area is actually 282 feet below sea level? With all due respect, what the flip is sea level? And has anyone considered that for Death Valley to be 282 feet below sea level, it would actually need to dip down in the opposite to the direction to the curvature over 8 miles and then the 282 feet below sea level? Do you see any indication on these Google Earth images of a dip of 8 miles contrary to the curvature shown on Google Earth? the non-existing curvature, even when viewing this area from many angles on Google Earth. This totally impossible feature of Death Valley is proof that our world couldn't possibly be a sphere unless you agree that Death Valley is not just 282 feet below sea level, but is actually over 8 miles below sea level when you figure the amount of curvature expected between the west coast of Cali and an area 262 miles inland known as Death Valley. Another nail in the coffin for the globe. Theology. One of the issues I have with the flat earth truth, it's not a theory. The globe is, by the way, a theory. But I have an issue with the whole theology argument used so often by the avid atheists or even the Bible-thumping Satanists and the Wall Street Journal-thumping secularists alike. Not saying there's any lack of theological argument to be made in favor of the earth being a stationary plane, which there certainly are many such arguments to be made. However, I don't consider myself to be a stereotypical Bible-thumping Christian, which is made abundantly clear if you've paid attention to my work. I am personally very much opposed to any brick and mortar business, which, known as the Catholic Church or, assorted lucrative Christian churches of our modern society, who are ultimately beholden to the Vatican anyway, the richest nation state in the world, bar none. There are some extremely interesting independent preachers who I hold an affinity to in many respects. For example, the pastor out of Arizona, Pastor Steven Anderson. On YouTube, it's S. Anderson 1611. I'll put a link in the description. I really like Pastor Anderson because he's independent and he's not required to adhere to strict orders, ultimately conforming to the Vatican's theology issued throughout essentially all denominations who are ultimately beholden to the Vatican, which was its initial purpose when set up by the Roman Emperor Constantine in the first place, with the sole purpose of co-opting and subverting Christianity, ultimately leading the Vatican to become one major element of the beast of the apocalypse, in my humble opinion. Although, again, I'm straying off topic a bit. What I'm saying here is that a group of people who seem to think we've simply made up our minds about this whole crazy flat earth thing based on our strict evangelical beliefs in the Bible is a ridiculous claim cooked up by the creative minds of people who would like to sully our collective image by associating us with scientifically inept, blindly faithful Christians who, they do exist, but that's not how I draw my conclusions. I've mentioned this before, however, being a brick and mortar Christian my entire rational, life growing up, forced upon me by my parents from a young age, much like the globe earth model was forced upon me by my parents and the school system at a young age, I was definitely a card-carrying NASA supporter and space enthusiast, and dreaded the 5-hour ordeal every week on Sunday that was a Greek Orthodox liturgy, not to mention every Wednesday evening going to church for several hours as well. In other words, I was never a big fan of the brick and mortar church, although I've always held a strong affinity for the teachings of Christ, and ultimately do believe the New Testament to contain true accounts of the prophesied Messiah or Savior of the entire world. All of the prophecies foretelling his coming were certainly fulfilled with Christ. Any astrological associations made with Christ were inserted into the dogma after the fact by the Roman Catholic Church, which was inherently a multi-theistic culture with a strong affinity for all things astronomy. It's no surprise that we celebrate Easter on the spring equinox and Christmas on the winter solstice. These astrological dates have nothing to do with Christ or Christianity whatsoever, and anyone parroting the zeitgeist nonsense has an inherent misunderstanding of Christianity and how it was co-opted by manipulative men, just like all other forms of power and influence in our modern world, the New World Order, or the New Order of the Ages, with a new understanding of the universe, encoded within the e pluribus unum from many come one, or simply universe, in the money supply. With that being stated, it really never occurred to me that the spinning earth nonsense is indeed in direct contradiction to the Bible, which it truly is in direct contradiction to the Bible. But to be very honest, the biblical ramifications of the earth being stationary plane were a total afterthought as far as I was concerned, as I inspected the lack of sphericity phenomenon from a strictly scientific or zetetic standpoint, and was indeed well into my irreversible conclusion that the world couldn't possibly be a spinning sphere, when it eventually dawned on me that the Bible, including and especially page 1 of Genesis, indeed states explicitly that the world is a stationary, immovable plane. And, by ignoring this subconsciously and blindly following the conventional science, perpetuated by NASA and world treaties such as the Antarctic Treaty, and simultaneously following conventional religion, I was by definition confounded in my very understanding upon the ground which I've stood upon my entire life. The point I'm making here is that while the fact that the world is a stationary plane lends credence, no pun intended, but it lends credence to the Bible, and my personal conclusion is based on factual, verifiable evidence, and was in no way formed by my religious beliefs, and indeed the two were in direct conflict for my entire life. So the argument that, this whole flat earth, quote, theory is an evangelical Christian absurdity is an absurd statement to make. A conventional theoretical physicist, on the other hand, does indeed believe in a false picture of reality and uses that as evidence to put himself above the idea of God, as God couldn't possibly exist in the infinite chaotic universe that they so gullibly subscribe to, without a shred of evidence to support their position.
In the history of human civilization, do I believe in the God that you believe in?
Yes.
Okay, that's probably what I was guessing. Is that the Christian God?
Catholic.
Catholic, that'd be Christian. Yeah. Okay, so, every time I hear someone say that God, I ask people, what is God to you? And they say God is good and God is all powerful. And, okay. So then, you know what happened? This happened in the 1700s. The city of Lisbon, Portugal. 1755, I think was the year. If I'm off by like 3 years. Lisbon, Portugal, one of the holiest cities in all of Europe. A Catholic city. All Saints' Day, one of the holier days in the Christian calendar, back then especially. Everyone was in church, worshiping. That morning, there was an earthquake. And that earthquake, what buildings are most susceptible to earthquakes? The tallest, biggest buildings. And this is 1755. What are the tallest, biggest buildings in Lisbon? The churches. So, that morning, 80,000 people died in their churches from the collapse of the domes, the walls, and what followed the earthquake.
Corinthians chapter number 3, the part that I wanted to focus on is beginning in verse number 9, where the Bible reads, "For we are laborers together with God. Ye are God's husbandry, ye are God's building." And the title of my sermon tonight is this: Ye are God's building. Now let's keep on reading here. It says in the next verse, "According to the grace of God which is given unto me, as a wise master builder, I have laid the foundation, and another built thereon. But let every man take heed how he buildeth thereupon. For other foundation can no man lay than that is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now if any man build upon this foundation gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, stubble, every man's work shall be made manifest, for the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire, and the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is. If any man's work abide, which he hath built thereupon, he shall receive a reward. If any man's work shall be burned, he shall suffer loss, but he himself shall be saved, yet so as by fire. Know ye not," watch this, "that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy, for the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are. Now, it's very clear when we read this passage that the building that's being built here is a spiritual building. We're not talking about a physical building where we have a bunch of trucks out there bringing in cement to lay the foundation and we're going to build a big building. No, it's a spiritual building. Jesus Christ is the foundation. And he says that building is people, because he says to the people of the church of Corinth, ye are God's building, in verse number 9. And then at the end he says, the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are. Now if you would go to Ephesians chapter number 2. And the reason I point this out is because we live in a day where churches often place great emphasis on building great physical buildings. Giant physical structures, beautiful structures. Is that really the main work that God has called us to do? Is that something that the New Testament emphasizes in any way, shape, or form? In all of the letters that the Apostle Paul is writing unto these various churches, where he talks about the things that he's working on and the things that they're working on and the things that they need to improve, or he never one time brings up their great big building program or the great big fundraiser to raise money for the building. Yet in most churches today, this has become a great emphasis, raising huge amounts of money to buy expensive buildings.
A tsunami followed the earthquake, basically wiping the city of Lisbon clean. Okay, that was the beginning of what we today think of as the modern atheism. Because at the time people said, if God is all loving, how could he have possibly done this? God presumably controlling the forces of nature. We're not talking about man's inhumanity to man here, which would be the consequence of free will. We're talking about nature. And so people at the time, led by people such as Voltaire, asked the question, if there is a God, and we had this tsunami that killed 80,000 people and wiped out a holy city on a holy day, collapsing churches onto people's heads, then either God is not all powerful or God is not all good. If we define good by being interested in your health and longevity, that's a fair definition of being good, I would think. And so that created an entire philosophical rift in the theological community, and people parted ways at that time. So when I look at the universe and I see asteroids coming down to strike and rendering species extinct, I see forces of nature that would just as soon have us dead or extinct. I don't see the goodness in the world that people speak of. And am I being selective? I don't think so. A tsunami hit Indonesia, 250,000 people died. An earthquake hit Haiti, 250,000 people died. This is nature killing us. I've joked about it. I said, if another earthquake comes, we should get the hint that Earth is trying to shake us off. You ever see a dog like shake after it's wet? It's like, Earth, say, get off. Humans, listen. So, when people define God in that way, I don't see the all good part. I see some good, I see a lot of bad. Nature trying to interrupt my health and my longevity. So now, that being said, nearly half of all scientists are religious. They pray to a God. Half of all Western in America. So being a scientist does not make you not believe in God. Nearly half. Here's the difference. The scientists who are productive, who are also religious, do not use the Bible as their science reference. The Bible, they've removed all, and they use the Bible as a source of their spiritual fulfillment and enlightenment. And they draw a line in the sand. And Galileo said this first. Galileo, a religious Catholic man in Italy, he said it first. He's reading the Bible and he's got it, but then he invents a telescope. He builds a telescope, best one ever. And he's looking at the universe and he said, this doesn't match up. And so he comes up with the phrase, a brilliant phrase, in a letter to a friend of his. He said, apparently, the Bible tells you how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go.
exist in the infinite chaotic universe that they so gullibly subscribe to, without a shred of evidence to support their position. Now, I've gone to great lengths over the course of my videos in the last 5 months or so to show how any and all evidence of a globe Earth is indeed a series of contrived or misguided assumptions upon which the entire conventional paradigm is founded. When we prove a few things like the world's oceans possess exactly zero curvature, this should be enough for a scientific mind to at least consider other options. However, they simply look the other way, dismiss us, and continue believing the lie which they've been comfortable with their entire life. When we point to lighthouses visible beyond 70 miles at sea, when they technically should be hundreds of feet below the horizon line at that distance and should be pointed out into space, we still ignore that evidence and continue believing we live stuck to the side of a spinning sphere. We can demonstrate how visible space should be opposite ends of the universe from the vantage point of Earth at night when comparing seasons to seasons, eons to eons, yet we consistently see the same stars year-round with the North Pole star Polaris directly above the central axis at all times, a feat which is theoretically impossible if you scrutinize the situation with any degree of logic or skepticism. We can show you how the laws of perspective create conditions at sea where the masts of ships will necessarily appear before the hulls on a plane, and distant ships in such situations can have their hulls restored by focusing a telescope towards the horizon, proving the ship has not gone round the curve of the Earth, but has simply obeyed the natural laws of perspective, refraction, on a flat surface many miles into the distance. There are arguments abound that cast doubt on the validity of the world being a stationary plane, which amount to the entire flat Earth movement being confounded in the very basic fundamentals of the model, which is a misguided, naive stance on the topic. There are certain elements of the true, correct, stationary plane which we live on that cannot be argued against. However, there are many elements to our world where we must either never consider or use our best discernment and logical extrapolations to form our best guess or our view of the system as a whole beyond what we can see or scrutinize or measure. The world possessing zero curvature is certainly an element to this thing we can all agree upon, and I submit those professing a concave or hollow globe Earth where we live stuck to the inside of a ball with all of space on the interior is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, and there's absolutely zero evidence to support this ridiculous theory. With that particular piece of nonsense aside, there are plenty of points which unify all flat earthers. However, there's a lot of wild speculation which goes in too many directions to list, and I think that sort of wild speculation can get us into trouble. I mean, I don't have a problem with speculation or logical extrapolation, but it's important to me that we distinguish between the two. An example, what we can prove and what we believe to be true based on certain facts and how we arrived at those conclusions. But the tenets of the world being a stationary plane are quite simple. The world is demonstrably a stationary plane, which is inherently mutually exclusive to a spinning globe. Therefore, the world couldn't possibly be a spinning globe, and that is the logic of the flat Earth model. I'm fairly certain that most flat earthers out there would at least agree with me on that point. On the other hand, you have misinformation campaigns such as the Flat Earth Society, not to be confused with IFERS, which are totally different. IFERS is International Flat Earth Research Society, but the Flat Earth Society are constantly pumping out misinformation in order to steer logical people away from the discussion by making the idea of a stationary plane Earth seem so asinine that it's not even to deserve a single instant of thought.
Well, with the right density and thickness, living in the middle could feel pretty normal. But as you moved toward the edge, gravity on a disk Earth would slightly skew, pushing at a greater and greater angle back toward the center. My friend Nick from Yeti Dynamics put together this great simulation. The person and buildings obviously aren't to scale, but check out how such increasingly diagonal gravity would work. Although this is a flat disk, it would feel to a runner headed toward the edge like they were fighting to climb up a steeper and steeper hill.
They are counting on this reaction, as this is how we've all been programmed our entire lives, and they count on stating some nonsense such as the world is a spinning disk constantly accelerating upward at 9.8 meters per second to cause the effects of gravity. This is, of course, the most ridiculous thing you could possibly imagine. However, plenty of intelligent people have been dissuaded from considering the flat Earth model due to the red herring false arguments which are designed to immediately place the flat Earth topic into the lunatic idiot bucket for most logical passers-by. The truth is, our world is obviously flat and stationary and is not spinning, nor is it accelerating upwards. Our world is unique in the entire cosmos, which is a misnomer, as there are certainly not billions and billions of galaxies up in the sky, as our world is on the ground, while the celestial bodies are obviously in the sky. If you can take the time to rationally, skeptically scrutinize the globe model, along with any other ideal you've taken for granted your entire life, you will certainly be no worse off for it, and will only have either a more realistic understanding of your existing paradigm, or perhaps you'll be closer to the truth and our natural place in the universe. The conventional paradigm has made it nearly impossible for rational people to compare the accepted model, apples to apples, with anything alternative to a spinning sphere. However, I hope that I'm able to steer you towards the truth. I don't expect any rational person just to watch a video about this and decide the globe is a load of crap. I hope that you have the wisdom and drive to see the truth, which is necessary to weigh all of the facts and data in both models, and then draw a rational conclusion based on your own logic and your own discernment. I hope that you are able to see past the lifetime of false assumptions, misunderstandings, and ultimately lies which you have been convinced to be true since you were very small. The reason I'm so passionate about this is because it's important to me that people understand the truth. You can call me insane, but please, try to debunk it. I challenge you to prove the world as a spinning sphere and disprove that the world is actually a stationary plane. Switching gears to the pyramids, Cairo elevation on an average is 75 feet above sea level, I would imagine, while Giza is 454 feet above sea level, according to the assorted official internet sources. However, if you look at the topographic maps of Giza and Cairo area, it all seems rather flat, but I guess there's not much difference between 75 feet and almost 400 feet higher than that on the grand scheme of things. But anyways, the Giza area is about 100 miles away from the sea, figuring in the spherical geometry of the Earth. The elevation above sea level should be much higher than 75 feet or even 454 feet. However, we're expected to believe that sea level is not affected by the non-existing curve of the Earth. As the land gets more and more distant from the coast, it should always get higher and higher above the water level, which is apparently not the case when you consider places like Death Valley. The Great Pyramid at Giza, the largest of the three, has a base of 756 feet, or almost 1/6 mile from one corner to the adjacent corner. The tallest of the three Great Pyramids is 481 feet tall. If you look at the Google images of the pyramids from either a drone in the sky or, from a satellite or whatever you want to call it, it's apparent that all three possess the exact same structural angles from that vantage point, and while perfectly constructed, are a testament to the fact that the area upon which they are built is a perfectly flat plane, and certainly not a sphere with a curve. Now, of course, they would have leveled out the area prior, but, if you level out a curve, then shouldn't there be a dip in the ground where the pyramids are? I don't know. The pyramids have always been fascinating to me, not just because of the scale and precision, but because of the fact that the Egyptians, who are often credited with building the great structures, appear to me to have simply happened across the already completed pyramids and simply took up residence there. And these giant monolithic structures were certainly not built as tombs. If you follow the work of Graham Hancock and engineer Christopher Dunn, there's a bunch of compelling evidence that the pyramids were actually extremely high tech, possibly piezoelectric power plants designed to generate some type of power or harmonic resonance, or even more exotic theories beyond those.
In the Giza power plant, I questioned the theory whether the pyramids were actually tombs. And after conducting considerable research, I could not find any evidence that there were any original burials within the pyramids. Of course, that raises the question, if they were not tombs, what were they used for? What I did is I examined the Great Pyramid and did a reverse engineering study of it. What I concluded was that it was actually used to generate energy. And it generated energy in a way that was extremely holistic. It actually did more than just generate energy, creating an environment, an acoustic environment, that was peaceful and extremely beneficial to their health. Of course, we could talk about the precision of the Great Pyramid, and the precision is considerable. It is, that passageway itself was surveyed by William Flinders Petrie in the 1880s. And he determined through his measures that the passageway was straight in the constructed portion to within 20 thousandths of an inch. That's the thickness of a thumbnail. Over the entire length of the chamber, the full 350 feet, it only varied a quarter of an inch. That is an amazing precision. The subchamber itself, I am now coming to realize, was actually using hydraulics to cause a pulse generator. It actually generated a pulse that drove the entire pyramid into harmony. Of course, moving up into the pyramid, we have the ascending passage and many unusual features that are found there, such as the granite stone plugs at the end of the passageway. They don't seem to have any real construction purpose, while the theory is that they were there to prevent tomb robbers from entering the center of the pyramid. Really, all they did was attract attention. And Al-Mamun, when he chiseled into the Great Pyramid in 812 AD, did so when he identified those granite plugs and determined that perhaps something may lie behind them. And sure enough, what lay behind them was a shaft. He chiseled the limestone around them and a shaft straight up into the heart of the Great Pyramid. Coming to the end of that small shaft is what they call a Grand Gallery. The Grand Gallery is considered to be an architectural masterpiece. It consists of corbelled layers, 7 corbelled layers, where the gallery actually gets smaller towards the top. Also, along the side of the Grand Gallery, we have ramps, and into the ramps are cut these notches. These notches are cut vertically into the ramps. There are 27 pairs of these notches, and as you go along the length of the gallery, you come to what has been called the Great Step. Climbing up the step, you have a horizontal passage, and then through the horizontal passage, a small antechamber, then again another small passage into the King's Chamber. The King's Chamber complex is the heart of the power plant. It is constructed solely of granite. It is tuned to a high degree to resonate at 440. It also emits naturally an F-sharp chord, and this was detected by an acoustic engineer named Tom Danley in 1995. The chamber is freestanding within the heart of the pyramid. It is not connected to the core blocks, and is free to resonate and vibrate at will. Overlaying the king's chamber, we have 5 layers of granite beams. These granite beams, I speculated in my book, are actually resonating beams. They are unusually cut. They're cut square and flat on 3 sides, but the top side is very rough. The roughness on the top side, I believe, was done in order to tune the beams. Just like you would tune a bell, you would actually remove material until you achieve the tone that you wanted. The whole complex is like a musical instrument, and each feature lends resonance to the other feature. In the king's chamber, we have a box. I call a box, conventionally it's called a sarcophagus. However, there have been no mummies, original burials found in any pyramid, and there was nothing found in the Great Pyramid, even when Al-Mamun entered in 812 AD. So the question is, what were these for?
Graham, exactly what are the pyramids?
Okay. Let's first of all deal with the Egyptological orthodoxy. They tell us that the 3 great pyramids of Egypt are the tombs of 3 megalomaniac pharaohs, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, 3 pharaohs of the 4th dynasty, who ruled at around the period of 2500 BC. And they say that that's all they are, tombs and tombs only. They say that the Great Sphinx is a monumental statue that was carved to aggrandize the ego of one of those pharaohs, Pharaoh Khafre, and that the face of the Sphinx is carved into his image, and that it was created in 2500 BC. And if you look this matter up in any encyclopedia, or if you read it in any orthodox popular text, such as the National Geographic magazine or the misleadingly named Time, Life, Lost Civilization series, you'll see this same tired, old theory being regurgitated again and again as though it were the revealed truth of God. And nobody ever tells us that that's all it is. It's just a theory. It's just the opinion of a very few, by the way, scholars. It's just their opinion based on no facts whatsoever. The Egyptological notion that the Great Pyramids are tombs is purely and simply a matter of opinion. No burial of any pharaoh has ever been found inside those colossal and extraordinary monuments. They are completely bare. They contain no inscriptions whatsoever. They are stark, austere, and anonymous. They stand out there on the Giza Plateau begging the intelligent and the curious to work out what they are. But they tell us one thing very definitely about themselves, that they were built by master astronomers and master engineers with skills and talents almost beyond human imagining. No burials, no mummified body ever found,
all right,
no sarcophagus ever found.
Gotcha. What is in them? Aren't there chambers and so forth and so on? Now, I've never been there, so I don't know.
All of the 3 pyramids of Giza have chambers in them.
Yes.
Known chambers, and as we show in the message of the Sphinx, as yet undiscovered chambers as well. The 2 secondary pyramids, the 2nd pyramid and the 3rd pyramid, have just 1 major chamber each. The 3rd pyramid has a group of smaller chambers as well, and these are underground. The chamber systems are under the ground, under the base of the pyramid, but the Great Pyramid, the pyramid that Egyptologists attribute to Khufu, contains a subterranean chamber which is 100 feet below ground. Mm-hmm. It contains the so-called Queen's Chamber, and this attribution is purely arbitrary. There's no basis for it, which is in the superstructure of the monument about 100 feet above ground. And about a further 100 feet above that, there's a 3rd, much larger chamber with a group of smaller chambers above it. These are massive cavities in some cases inside the body of this 6 million ton monument. They're joined up by an intricate network of corridors and passageways. And mysteriously, in the Great Pyramid, there are 4 very narrow shafts two of them from the so-called king chamber. These are 8 inches wide and 8 inches high, cut all the way through the body of the monument. They rise at an incline, at an angle, and they exit on the outside of the monument. But the two lower shafts from the so-called queen's chamber do not exit on the outside of the monument. They stop somewhere inside that vast 6 million ton bulk. And this, the mystery of these shafts is one of the issues that we investigate in the Message of the Sphinx, because at the end of one of those shafts, in 1993, after an exploration by a small robotic camera, was discovered a door complete with 2 metal handles. And an amazing archaeological scandal surrounds what has happened concerning that door and the chamber that lies beyond it, and also a chamber that lies deep beneath the Great Sphinx.
Yikes. What, aside from when we get down to the very mysterious door and so forth, what use do you suppose all these chambers had? What function? What use?
Well, it's going to take us some time to talk this through.
I think it's apparent when you consider the Great Pyramids found in South America have many common attributes with the pyramids found in Giza. We cannot rule out a long-forgotten race or worldwide civilization that was apparently wiped from the face of the earth with all of its magnificent technological advancements lost to the ages. Could these lost civilizations whose remnants mystify us with structures like the ancient pyramids actually be the remnants of the days of the Nephilim, spoken of in the stories of Noah? Could it be that the builders predating the Egyptian civilization or the South American civilizations that sprang up around the pyramids in their locale? These mysterious testaments to some highly technological advanced civilization with only traces left of their existence, built in immovable stone monuments, to stand firm through the test of time over thousands of years, remaining fixed and essentially unshaken. Of course, the Great Pyramids at Giza supposedly were at one point coated with an outer layer of specific types of stone which would have made each pyramid a different color. I believe one was red, black, and blue, or red, white, and blue. I'm not sure. But at any rate, have been argued to essentially resonate in harmonic frequencies as well as light frequencies when the basins beneath the Giza pyramids were through the ebb and flow of the river through the aqueducts underneath would have created a piezoelectric effect. I mean, there is evidence for this. But it's argued that they would resonate in harmonic frequencies as well as light frequencies. I can imagine that was an awesome sight to behold, a testament to the fact that whomever built those monuments were not building tombs within the Great Pyramids. Not one single mummy was ever found in any of them, nor was one single hieroglyph found within any of the Great Pyramids either. Could the truth really be found in Genesis, where God created this world for people to hold dominion, with the highest orders of angels to guide and teach us, but the vain and jealous Lucifer, along with a third of the watchers, betrayed God in a jealous rage and perverted God's most prized and beloved creation, humankind, causing God to destroy the entire world by flood? I think the world being a stationary plane, it's at least worth reconsidering the creation account found in Genesis, whether you are a believer in the Bible or not. If this type of information was apparently known to the writers of the Bible, what else did they know that we don't? Is it possible that the Bible really is the Word of God, passed down to our generation specifically for the purpose of leading us towards salvation, with His promises and prophecies and Word being fulfilled almost daily? The inherent and absolute knowledge of how precious and unique we are living here on the stationary plane of existence, that knowledge brings with it a natural self-esteem or understanding of self-worth to all people, who know this world is not akin to the celestial bodies in the sky, and therefore must be here for some purpose, not just a random accident as parroted across the modern paradigm. I submit the ancients' unparalleled achievements and efforts were a result of a closeness with God or their messengers, the highest orders of angels, and or a firm understanding of our natural place in the universe. Certainly couldn't hurt. Greek and Roman architects sought to counteract the ocular distortion witnessed by observers of their great buildings. Objects or proportions were increased as they increased in distance from the observer, creating the illusion of a perfectly flush, perfectly square building when viewed from a specific distance. Now, had they not taken these steps, the massive buildings would appear to taper away towards the edges and appear to be curved due to the natural laws of perspective, which are essentially ocular or optical distortion, which is ultimately caused by the way we people view the world with our particular style of eye. And yes, there are other types of eyes found in nature, so a Greek or Roman architectural masterpiece might not seem so perfect if you viewed it from, say, the eyeball of a fish, just as one contrary random example. Architects adjusted proportions so that the temple would appear correct when viewed at a distance 6 times the height of a column. This precise viewing distance related the viewer to the architecture and made the observer an integral part of the design process. Was human life considered more noble or respectful during the ancient times due to their accurate knowledge of our true standing in the universe? Does the way our neurological filter of reality, essentially light entering our eye and reflecting off the curved lens and being picked up as electrical signals by the optic nerves, does this process have any certain design structure which might cause us to view reality in a slightly skewed manner? When things are very close to us, our eyes are very keen and perfect instruments. We see something we want to grab, and within a few years of hand-eye coordination training, Super Mario Brothers notwithstanding, we can focus on an object of desire, reach out and grab it perfectly, which leads us to believe that what we see is what we get, and what we see is accurately represented by our neurological interpretation of optical data coming into our brain via the optical nerve after the light bounces around a bit, including upon a convex lens. Now, is it possible that as objects or horizons become distant, the way in which our eyes were designed don't necessarily render reality in a perfectly accurate manner? Or is it that reality tends to stray outside our realm of understanding, off to a specific vanishing point as distance from the observer increases, and therefore the relevance to the distant object to the observer decreases? Well, think about it logically. If you look at a row of telephone poles, basically level, going off into the distance along a straight path, each pole is basically a carbon copy of the last, and they are basically level all the way down the line. Do the more distant poles appear to get smaller and smaller, or do they actually shrink in size as they get further away from you? A quick experiment with the aid of an assistant makes this one easy. Simply observe a distant telephone pole and have your assistant measure it, and if it's about the same size as the one nearby, we can safely conclude that the way we view the world in terms of distant objects is skewed, and the distant objects themselves are not actually being skewed as they gain distance from us, the observer. Now, such an experiment is obviously a waste of time. However, certain things need to be proved to certain people. We tend to think of our eyes as ultimately accurate gauges of natural reality. However, when you consider these points, it becomes apparent that our eyes are not exactly 100% accurate all the time, since the distant telephone pole is obviously the exact same size and level as the nearby telephone pole. Sleight of hand magicians are well aware of our naive belief that our eyes simply cannot be fooled. Think about this: if our very keen and accurate eyes can be easily fooled by the natural world, and also, of course, by manipulative men with one motivation or another to deceive us, this goes for our very minds, and especially our mind's eye, or our pineal gland, which again consists basically of the same nerves and functionality as our real eye. The only difference between the mind's eye and the actual eye is that our mind's eye doesn't use light to render its imagery, but rather is self-generated by our own lifetime visual experiences and related experiences associated to those images in our mind. So, if our eyes can be tricked, and our minds can be tricked, and our mind's eye can be tricked, then it begs the question, why would anyone want to trick anyone else? Okay, so the sleight of hand magician gets paid to misdirect us and trick our eyes, and, we sort of enjoy that. But besides him, why would the empirical pillars of science and government want to trick us? Have they themselves been tricked and are merely parroting the same lies and misunderstandings that everyone else has been socially engineered to parrot? I think it's plausible. For another architectural example of altering reality to make certain achievements more aesthetically pleasing, Roman architect Vitruvius included calculations that dictate all parts above the column of a Doric building should be tilted downwards, so that they would appear to be vertical when viewed from below. What's more, if viewed from afar, these tilted elements would appear flush. So, in other words, by distorting physical reality, the great minds of history would prefer us to have a prettier view of reality, even though the construct is inherently skewed, to account for the flaws in our optical processes, or at least the way distant objects behave when viewed with the human eye, and our propensity to want to make our creations aesthetically pleasing. The point to these two architectural styles and workarounds for the effects of perspective, the very laws which govern the way people view the world, and the subjective laws of perspective have been a known constant for as long as people have been thinking critically, and even accounting for ocular distortion in ancient buildings, and documenting such observations and workarounds in recoverable formats. To summarize, the constructs of men who wish to portray things as perfect or immaculate are not necessarily as perfect as they may seem, and in many cases are skewed by their designers to appear perfect, but in fact, intense observations and intricate steps have been taken to achieve an optical illusion simply to please the eye of the beholder, as well as place the designer on a pedestal and give the facade of natural equilibrium or aesthetics in the very designs of their architecture. When you consider the great structures of ancient Greece and Rome were intentionally skewed in order to make them more aesthetically pleasing is a good example of this point. And while extremely astute of the ancient builders, such rose-colored glasses views on reality are not strictly limited to architecture or the great ancient builders in stone, but this also applies in many cases to the builders of our foundational understanding of the universe. Of course, the builders in stone had no nefarious purpose in their skewing of distant angles of the observer. However, this observation has to do with our inherent need to understand things completely and understand things as we'd fancy them to be understood, often throwing reality aside, or at least skewing reality for the aesthetically pleasing, and great lengths have been met throughout history to achieve similar effects for the benefit of the eye of the beholder, but also for the benefit of certain controlling elements of society who have been apparent throughout history, going back to arguably the ancient mystery schools of Babylon, right down to Freemasonry and other forms of esoteric Kabbalism across the world. So, with our primal need as human beings to have structure and order, along with our boundless curiosity always pushing us further and further through any venture, regardless of the peril involved, curiosity is arguably one of the most potent forms of our primal driving urges. Meddling or delving into all things unknown, or the insatiable hunger for ultimate truth, is one of our greatest assets as a people, but unfortunately is also one of our most vulnerable points for manipulation by heartless mustards who sign the paychecks for the military grunts and bank tellers alike. If our curiosity is satisfied or satiated early on in our lives while we're still easily tricked or gullible, when that inquisitiveness is satiated early on with total lies, or at best an extremely long series of misunderstandings, compounded by our naive need to empirically, structurally understand everything, looking to our teachers and elders for guidance who, while obviously well-intentioned, may or may not have a viable understanding of the subject matter whatsoever, although they will always assert to the student to possess such unquestionably accurate and well-tested understanding of the topic at hand, the globe Earth certainly notwithstanding. In other words, just because you get an A in science doesn't mean you are any closer to understanding natural reality than you were at the onset of the course. I get a lot of comments from people claiming to know the Earth is a globe for one reason or another. However, the proof they're pointing to is obviously and inherently explained rather logically and satisfactorily in the true, correct, stationary plane model. Whilst the very proof they originally pointed to is, ironically enough, contrary to or inconsistent with the notion of a spinning spherical Earth. To manipulate a person's mind, to me, is one of the worst atrocities you could possibly commit, short of physically murdering them, especially if your manipulation is of an insidious, deceptive nature geared towards innocent, trusting, and yes, gullible children, with the hidden agenda of controlling every last person's mind by setting up boundaries of what is possible, or contrarily, what is impossible, interlaced with an overarching thrust to increase the influence, wealth, power, and stature of your coven in the spectacular matrix of manipulation, which is a complex series of lies and misunderstandings designed to imprison our minds, to the obvious detriment of the population at large, without a single person even knowing such deception exists in their paradigm. In ages past, it was priests, clerics, and even Pharisees who claimed to have the answers to all the world's mysteries, yet these antiquated figureheads have been replaced by a new breed of clergy far more rigid in their belief system than any religious or occult group before or since. We're talking about the clergy of conventional, accepted theoretical physicists who supposedly govern our perception of what is possible. The clergy who accurately measure all things untangible, invisible, and unmeasurable, such as black holes, space-time, and let's not forget all the galaxies which contain billions of Earth-like planets. I've poured through all the images from Hubble I can find, and never once have I seen another infinite stationary plane above which all the celestial bodies orbit in perpetual circles around the magnetic center of the plane. The reason for this is because our world is totally unique in the universe, and the cosmos is a mere feature of our vast and unparalleled plane of existence, which supports all life in the universe and contains the only habitable real estate in the known universe. There's a small element of our society who is in control of essentially all mass media outlets, who happen to be owned by the same private banks which make up the private Federal Reserve and ultimately the world banks, and similar financial fiat currency hubs responsible for the debt enslavement of the entire civilized world. These quote, banks are peppered throughout the civilized world and work in collusion to seduce unsuspecting nations to relinquish the control of their finances over to a private group of elitists who've made a science out of ruining nations from the inside out by defacing their currency and ultimately owning all the real property and wealth of a nation, as well as all of their future tax revenues, perpetually forcing the sovereign population into perpetual debt slavery. They use the same tactic over and over like a rubber stamp, and it works every time. Set up a fiat currency, loan out the currency to the government at interest, ultimately end up enslaving the people and owning all the real property, while the people are left scrambling to make ends meet with the now worthless fiat currency, your insidious pushed on them in the first place. The United States knew better than this, and as the central banking schemes spawned by the Rothschild family and others like the Rockefellers were expressly forbidden and abhorrent to the American settlers, truly, a Federal Reserve banking system would have been unthinkable to the founders of our nation, and they would probably line you up and shoot you if you opened up a Bank of America franchise and began loaning out fiat currencies to unsuspecting citizens who've apparently forgotten the history of our country and the reasons why our country was founded in the first place. Unfortunately, during the 1913 Jekyll Island secret signing of the Federal Reserve Act, during an emergency meeting of compromised members of Congress only, the U.S. was secretly sowed with the seedlings of what we have today, an out-of-control Federal Reserve World Bank that controls all politics and media, military and educational systems. Essentially, all spheres of power and influence in this world are under the strict control of this very group of secretive, deceptive bankers who've robbed the world blind for the last 102 years. And as an interesting side note, you might be familiar with the huge revelation surrounding the sinking of the Titanic in recent years. I won't get into all the details surrounding this, but there are a few documentaries that irrefutably prove that the ship which sunk in the icy waters of the northern Atlantic was not the Titanic, but rather one of its nearly identical sister ships, the Britannic.
And were regularly moved in and out of the Thompson dry dock, especially during repairs to the Olympic. On close examination of contemporary archive photographs, it is possible to see the minor differences in design that tell the two ships apart. On the forward part of sea deck, Olympic was built with 16 portholes. The Titanic with 14. Somewhat mysteriously, the Titanic has acquired 2 extra portholes between its launch and its maiden voyage. This clearly points to the possibility that the two ships were switched. At the time of Titanic's launch, the windows on B deck are clearly discernible as being evenly spaced. Yet at the time of her maiden voyage, they have taken on a distinctly uneven appearance. And whereas the Olympic had been opened to the public for inspection in Belfast and Liverpool, Titanic was not, for the Titanic was put on the Olympic as part of the repairs after the collision with the Hawk. Remote cameras under the control of the discoverer of the Titanic wreck, Dr. Robert Ballard, have examined the stern section of the ship. They show that in addition to the lateral bulkheads that were a feature of both the Titanic and the Olympic, there is a longitudinal bulkhead in the stern section where there was none on the original plans for either vessel. The position of this bulkhead suggests a temporary repair has been carried out to strengthen the keel, a keel perhaps damaged by the collision with HMS Hawk. And finally, a close look at the bow could reveal the most damning evidence of all. In 1986, the French National Oceanographic Institute examined the wreck with Dr. Robert Ballard. One of the things they checked was the name of the ship. In keeping with White Star tradition, both ships had their names engraved into the upper bow plates in letters 4 foot high. Examination of the wreck and the name Titanic shows that it is made of iron letters which have been riveted onto the original bow plates. With the passage of time, 2 of the letters have dropped off and been lost forever in the sediment of the seabed. At the place where they once were, engraved into the hull, are the letters M and P.